Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Marketing for the Small Business podcast. I'm your host, Braedon Cruz, and on today's episode with Say Less and Sell More with a special guest, David Saltzman with the Saltzman Group. He's a fractional CMO offering a set of benefits. He's been in the business for quite some time. We're going to learn a lot of quality information with the marketing and advertising space. So, David Saltzman, how are you today, sir?
I'm well, Braedon. How are you?
I'm fantastic. It's a really good Friday. It's a little chilly out here in Tulsa, but hopefully we hit that spring weather sometime next week. So.
Hey, it's a little chilly here in Knoxville, and tomorrow morning it's supposed to be 27 degrees. So we went from being 60 degrees today to having a freeze warning tomorrow morning.
Yep. Yeah. Tulsa's right about there with you.
Yeah.
So, man, we've got a lot of really good content to cover today. And really, I want to talk about some big high level strategy and messaging that's targeted. And I think a lot of people throw money down a rabbit hole and they don't know where they're wasting that money. That goes back to that saying where you waste 50% of your marketing dollars, but you don't know where that 50% you're wasting. And that can be reflected all the way back to the very beginning with strategy and messaging. So you can reduce that 50% down to 10 if you have the right strategy and messaging and the right team behind you to support all that. So tell me a little bit about your history and how you got started.
Well, I've been an author and columnist for almost 35 years. Had a great career in the insurance industry. Have done an awful lot of different things. And when the Dead Tree magazine stopped publishing, I started writing content for some online e-zines and stuff. And about 13 years ago, I decided that I wanted to make a change. And the thing that really lit me up is helping people clarify and tell their stories and tell their message. Because, you know, as Tom Lehrer, the satirist, once said, the least those of you who can't communicate can do is shut up. And there are a lot of people who can't communicate. And that goes to exactly the problem that you were talking about all of a sudden watching your marketing dollars evaporate and there's nothing left behind except a puff of blue smoke. And so I've been doing that for a long time. And about 5 years ago, read a book that changed kind of my approach to marketing. It's called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. I'm sure some of your viewers have and listeners have read it. And I decided, well, I'm the marketing guy. You know, I can do this for myself. And after my third attempt, I called Nashville and Don's office and I said, hey, can I come study with you guys? Because clearly there's more to this than meets the eye. And have taken that approach with our clients. I believe that we're the only chief marketing officer organization I'm aware, or marketing organization for that matter, where I insist that we start with message, because marketing is downstream from message. And folks who don't do that end up having exactly the problem that you outlined, Braedon.
And so this is where you would say, this is where marketing starts. Step one is messaging. And this is also where a CMO would start. A chief marketing officer would start by, what is our messaging, and being able to tell that story accurately, right?
Right. You know, human beings are only designed to do two things. They're designed to thrive and survive. If we overload them with information and they can't clearly understand what it is we're trying to communicate, whether it's selling or anything else, they start hearing Charlie Brown's teacher. They just kind of tune out. Websites are a great example that I frequently use. How many times have you looked at a website and you've thought to yourself, wow, that's a really great website. I wonder what the hell they do. And that's death.
But so many times.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's because somebody had this great idea that, hey, let's go build a website and let's do some social media and let's do this and do that, insert buzzword here. But the message that they're putting out is completely and totally unclear. And if you listen to the research that Forrester gives us, and we'll stay on the web for a minute, although it's true of pretty much all forms of communication, we now have 13 seconds of eyeball time with somebody who's found our site or looking at our stuff to grab them as a client. And if they can't understand what you do in 13 seconds, they're gone. They're off to the next website.
Yeah, I just made a short TikTok about engagement rate and bounce rate. So we're not going to get too nitty gritty just yet, but just like what you said, like that's so important. A lot a lot of businesses that we approach and we start working with, their bounce rates are so high or their engagement rates are so low just from what Google Analytics is telling us. And a lot of times that even goes through social media. There's so many social media profiles where we look at and they're posting all sorts of stuff. Some of them can be great and some of them can be terrible. So some of them can be consistent. Some of them just haven't posted in the last 8 months. Are you still in business? I don't know. But I see like to where, some of that messaging is totally inconsistent. And you're like, I look and I'm like, what do you guys do? What are you here to solve? Like, who's your customer? And it's hard to determine that all the way down from when something's being posted or what's being put on the web, right?
Yeah, hit or miss is not a marketing strategy. Throwing spaghetti against the wall, hoping some of it will stick, not a marketing strategy. Volume of message, not a marketing strategy. So if your message isn't clear, you're toast. If you confuse, you lose. That's something, if you want to take away one thing from this conversation, if you're working on your marketing stuff and you confuse people, you're toast. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what venue you're in, whether it's social media, print, billboards, dropping leaflets from the sky. It doesn't matter because folks need to understand that you understand their problem and that you can solve it. In story brand parlance, we call that being the guide. And too often people omit the entire first part of the conversation that you have to have with yourself when you're building a marketing campaign. And they just figure, well, I've got solutions and I've got a big white horse. And so I'll just ride on into the client and I'll drop my marketing solutions on them. And huzzah, they will be amazed and they will be clients forever. And friends, it don't work that way for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that the people who run businesses, they're the hero of their story. You can't be the hero of their story. So we always tell clients, think Yoda, not Luke Skywalker.
Oh, that's awesome. Does every industry have a hero and a problem, right? So whether you're a retail pizza shop, restaurant, or SaaS company, does every industry and every company have a hero and a problem to solve?
Yeah, they have a hero, or I prefer to call it, I know some people call it hero, and they use the nomenclature of a hero's journey. I prefer to call it a main character because sometimes they're heroic and sometimes they're not. But the bottom line is that they have a problem. If we take you through the 7-part story brand framework in really short order, it's a main character has a problem. That character expresses that problem, and this is really important, externally, internally, and philosophically. That main character meets a guide, and the guide shows empathy and authority, says, hey, I understand your problem. We've solved loads of problems like this before. We can help you. Kind of like, don't go down that road because there's potholes and trees down. Go this way. It's paved. It's better. And then the guide gives them a simple plan. The plan is 1, 2, 3, 4. If you must, 5, but that's it. And then the guide shows them what life will look like, what success will look like if they follow that plan after a couple of calls to action, and what it looks like if they don't. And the reason that we use the what happens if they don't is because fear of loss is a much greater human motivator than desire for gain. So we paint both pictures.
That's fascinating. And I'm going to kind of take a step back to the CMO
Sure.
beginning part is what is a CMO? What do they do?
A chief marketing officer is someone who's responsible for the message and the strategy and the implementation of the marketing efforts for a particular company.
And for those who are wondering, it's not that person that's updating the website, and it's not that person making a post on social media. Those are separate roles.
Correct. That's why I said it's the person who's responsible for that. Now, truth be told, in some organizations, it's one person doing all that stuff. You've had clients like that, so have I. In other cases, there's a whole bunch of people. In some cases, it's outsourced. But at the end of the day, the CMO is the tip of the spear. The CMO is the person who works with the organization to understand what their imperatives are, what their needs are, and to help translate that into marketing that solves those problems and brings in the solutions to those needs.
And you don't have to have this role full time in order for it to provide value.
Well, no. In point of fact, if you know that, as most of us do, that most of America's businesses are small businesses, a full-time chief marketing officer for a decent-sized company can run upwards of $250,000 a year plus benefits. Good ones are worth every penny. Bad ones aren't worth any penny, but that's the range. But if you go to a relatively mid-sized business, say they're 50 or 60 or 75 or 100 employees, even sometimes 200, all of their executives are wearing 3 or 4 hats, and they don't have that kind of budget, but they still have that kind of need. Arguably, they have more of the need because they're all fractured so much. So what we as fractional CMOs do is we go in and we say, okay, you can't afford a full-time chief marketing officer. You still need that kind of help. So you can buy us on a part-time basis, whether it's a project basis or whether it's you buy so many hours a month or some combination of the two, or whether you just do an annualized agreement where you're not a full-time employee and they don't have all that cost and overhead, but they still get that input that they need.
Which is highly valuable for sure. And I know it saves companies a ton of money from having to afford that full-time position and insurance and taxes and, another butt in the seat costs more money. So if you don't have to have them
they just
in-house,
can't. I mean, it's not a question of they don't want it. It's just a question of they just don't have the budget for it.
And I heard that, I believe it was a conversation that you and I had a couple of weeks ago, was that the average CMO in a company only lasts 2 years. And knowing that, if that's correct, that's expensive to replace that person, especially if there's a 6-figure salary. You're not paying someone $45,000 a year to be a CMO, right?
No,
right.
And it's because of exactly what you talked about at the open. It's because folks get this notion that, okay, cool, we're going to do some marketing. And they hire somebody and they bring them in and they start throwing spaghetti against the wall. And at the end of the first year, they do a recap and they go, gee, this didn't work out the way we thought it was going to be. And the CMO says, yeah, but it's really only 6 months worth of results because the first 6 months I was kind of getting your input, learning your business, understanding what you need. And then they get to another 12 months and the same things happen and everybody just gets frustrated and they say, well, this isn't working. And in large measure, that's because they never worked on the message.
At what point would you recommend a company needing a CMO? Like we just understood that you can't hire a CMO for $45,000 a year, right? These are commonly 6-figure full-time roles, or fractionally. There's adjustable rates in that too, depending on who you hire for your fractional CMO. But at what point do you think a company should consider hiring for that role internally or externally?
I think when they've plateaued is a time that a lot of companies look at that and go, okay, what do we need to move to the next level? If their messaging isn't getting traction, if they're sitting there saying to themselves, gee, we've got a better mousetrap, but nobody's buying it. Don't understand what the problem is. And so they're talking about the mechanics of how the mousetrap works. And they're not talking about, hey, you got mice in your house? Boy, that's a nuisance. We can help you. It varies from client to client, but typically when they get to that third psychological level, that internal level that we talked about, and their brain is going, it just shouldn't be so darn hard to do X. You need to bring somebody else in to kind of take a look at the messaging and help you. And I think of equal import is to help your team, because once you hone the message down, you want the team to be bringing the same message to the street. That way you look like a cohesive, bigger organization.
And you're a fractional CMO yourself, right?
Yes.
So who do you need in position prior to you stepping in?
In the company?
Yes. So if you're like, well, I mean, we're not talking C-level, like we're talking anybody around you that would support you in what you're helping the company strive for.
It depends on the client. That's a great question. Every client is different. Some clients have folks internally who do that kind of work. And for some of our clients, we do that kind of work. Now, I don't do most of it myself anymore. I have a team of folks that I work with who can provide all those kinds of things. I mean, I'm glad to work with somebody on the wording for a wireframe for a website, but I don't build websites anymore. But I've got folks who do and who are brilliant at it. So every client is different. I mean, my motto kind of unofficially is when you've seen one client, you've seen one client.
Doesn't mean that they're all copy and paste in the exact same structure or the exact same needs either.
No, actually, it means that each one is unique and you've got to take them on as unique. Even if, you're saying in the back of your head, I've seen this problem before. I know what's going to happen here. They're still unique. They have unique desires and unique wants and unique goals. and unique ways of getting there and budgets and all those kinds of variables. That doesn't really change whether you're coming in as an FTE or whether you're coming in as a fractional.
Do you think it matters what kind of CMO has in their experience and what trade they like to pertain to? So, for example, could a CMO from a SaaS company come over to CMO as an engineering company?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The problem is the problem, and the solution is the solution. And I've worked with all kinds of companies. I worked with a client out in Austria last year who was a former Tony Robbins trainer who was starting his own coaching business and needed help doing that kind of stuff. I work with people who are doing small business cloud computing solutions. Obviously, I work with some folks in the insurance industry. It doesn't really matter so much. I mean, we work in high tech, we work in medicine, because when you scale it all back, and the reason that Don still sells 100,000 books a year is that the problems really aren't that different, and the approach to them isn't that different. You have a main character. I'm going to be redundant here, but for purposes of this question, you have a main character who's got a problem and needs the problem solved and is stuck. That doesn't matter what industry it is, right. Whether they need to produce more rubber baby buggy bumpers or they need to, bring more eyeballs to their product or whatever.
Well, that's what I've argued too. So I professionally don't like to pertain to just one industry. I can agree with you on that too. Like the problem's a problem and there's a solution to that problem. No matter what the industry is, it's okay. What are your unique challenges? What's your particular, things like budget or people or services can vary, but again, the problem is going to stay the same. There's a solution that I can help you figure out to the problem. Basically, how can I acquire people's eyeballs? How can I get their attention? Right? How do I create that messaging? What content needs to be created or things like that after the messaging's created and that strategy's put together in order to acquire people's attention to bring them to that business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if there is industry-specific information that a fractional CMO or a CMO who's full-time needs to know, it's on them to learn about it. You get your cues from the client, but the answer is, okay, well, what are the challenges in this industry? What's going on? Who are the competitors? What's the noise like? How do you cut through? What do you need to differentiate? It's the same kind of, I call it a PSSR kind of mindset. What's the problem? What's the scope of the problem? What's the solution? And what's the result?
And I'm glad that you said just a moment ago that it takes about 6 months to work with the client or to work with a business or work in a space to be able to understand their unique challenges, their unique demographic. And I'll explain to multiple businesses, I'm like, just because this particular method worked for them does not mean it's going to work for you. Right.
That's
just
true.
Because whatever avenue, advertising or messaging, et cetera, that they've done doesn't mean I can sit here, copy and paste that. And now your demographic's going to love that and they're going to engage or convert the exact same way.
Well, no, in point of fact, that's one of the problems that we deal with so often is that within an industry, somebody wants to do what their competitors are doing. And my answer is always, you don't ever want to be doing what your competitors are doing.
You want to do what they're not doing.
Correct. But should be. Thank you for finishing my sentence. We sound like an old married couple now, but yeah.
I love it. But let's get passionate together about it.
You know what? It's truth, right? If you want to cut through the noise, you can't do what everybody else is doing because then you're the noise. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to be the noise, be different.
Yep. Have you heard of Mike Michalowicz?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I've actually had the pleasure a couple of weeks ago of seeing Mike speak down in Coral Gables at a meeting I was at.
Oh, how was that? I'd love to go.
It was awesome. And he's a great speaker.
That's awesome. I'm reading his one of his audiobooks that's actually Be Different, which is what you just said. About 16% through that book, and I've downloaded the resources and I'm working on that as well. And I'm always eager to learn and to learn new things and try new practices and things like that as well, and also to learn from others such as yourself. Right.
Well, I think you find that in people who are in the marketing business, you have to, because if you don't stay current and you get stale, you're just like a cookie, you crumble.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now that we're talking about being different, and this is probably going to be a pretty good segment here. How do I differentiate my brand and messaging? Is there a framework? Is there any particular ideas? Is there a structure to this? Or is it like honestly just unique and we have to come up with a scenario to talk about?
Well, I think the answer to your question is both. each company is unique and each industry is unique in its own way. But the problem that I find most often is the infection that needs to be cured is that folks talk about how their watch is made and don't just answer the question, what time is it? Clients don't care about all the backroom stuff that you care about. Clients don't care about how all the pieces go together. I'll give you a quick kind of funny story. A friend of mine, got to be a friend because you can't do this to somebody who's not a friend, but a friend of mine a couple of years ago called me and said, hey, I think I need some help with my marketing. Can you help me? And I said, well, sure, but it was in the fall. And I said, I really don't have availability until after the first of the year. I was finishing up a couple of large projects, one of which was that fellow in Austria that I mentioned. And he said, well, okay, that's great. We can work together after the first of the year, but we got a half an hour scheduled for the call. If you were going to start, where would you start? Oh, okay, want to play this game? We'll do that. I said, your website. And he said, well, what's wrong with our website? And I said, it sucks.
You just called us baby ugly.
Yep. And
at least you're honest. I mean,
well, but it's worse. It's worse because he said, well, okay, that surprises me. Can you tell me what part of the website is terrible? I said, no, I can't do that. And he said, why not? I said, because I've never seen your website, but I can tell you it sucks. He said, how can you tell me it sucks if you've never seen it? And so I started by telling him what was on, without seeing it, what was on the homepage of his website. We've got great team and great products and we've won all these awards and we do this and we do that. And he said, well, we're really proud of that. I said, cool. Put it in a corporate brochure, snail mail it to the client a week before your appointment and say, I want to focus on you during our appointment, but I thought you might want to learn a little bit about us. So you have every right to be proud of all of that stuff. But there isn't a prospect on earth who gives a whit about any of it. They want to know that you understand their problem and that you can solve it. That's all. So there are commonalities even within the differentiation, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this kind of falls up to the next kind of segment is that secret sauce, right? How do you figure out what that secret sauce is? Like, I think we've been talking about analysis, competitor analysis, right? Being able to figure out like what they're doing, what they're not doing, how can we differentiate, and how can we acquire the attention of the audience, right? What do you have more on like the secret sauce stuff? Because that's what everyone wants to know. They're like, there's some magic to this because they've seen these companies scale and grow quick, right? So we go all the way back to the messaging and we talk about the external and which is like, what do you tell others? And then the internal part of like, what do you tell yourself? And you and I had some great conversations on that a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the reason that's important. And I'll go back to the psychological depths of all of this, because it underpins the answer to your question. We don't make decisions with the prefrontal cortex, which is the reasoning part of our brain. There's a great industrial psychologist named Daniel Kahneman who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I do not recommend the book to anybody who is not a fourth-year psych student because it's really dense. But Kahneman's thesis that he proved over the course of his lifetime of work is that we make decisions, buying decisions, who we love, what house we buy, what car we get, what to buy for dinner, etc. We make those decisions with the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system. It's where that emotional part of our brain still lives. We've just gotten, as human beings, amazingly adept over thousands of years at instantly rationalizing those decisions. So we think we're making rational decisions, but in point of fact, we're making emotional decisions. So the first step to connecting with the prospect that you want to connect with is understanding what their problem is on a psychological level so that you can push that little button. It sounds, kind of cut and dried and medicinal, but that's how people think. That's how you get to them. If you think about the commercials that you remember, I mean, the one that I always use because everybody remembers it is, and it only runs at Christmas time, is the one with the polar bears and the Coca-Cola. And it's always an kind of warm and fuzzy moment, but right. That's the message of the holidays. It's being around family. It's all those kinds of things. And that's why that commercial resonates. Sometimes it can be fear, like that commercial that Apple only ran once with a guy throwing a hammer through the screen in the theater. But people still talk about it. Why? Because it triggered an emotion. So that's the first step. You need to understand that emotional piece. Market research is great. It's terrific to understand what everybody else is doing. But every successful business ultimately is based on relationships. And relationships are created by guides who have empathy and authority. And so that's how you want to position yourself in your given market.
I agree on everything that you just said. I've told a lot of people that I don't believe it's ever just business. I believe you have to, and if people are making emotional decisions, then you have to build a relationship. You have to build some level of trust. They have to be able to make some level of emotional decision, right? So it's never just business, and there's a lot of trust that has to be built up in that as well too. So even if in the messaging in what an ad portrays, or video or copy or an article or something like that, there's got to be something that evokes an emotion. This is actually pretty relevant. There's a client called Soldier's Wish that we work with, and then they grant wishes to veterans. They're a nonprofit agency. There was one veteran that he's 87 years old, and he hasn't had heat in his home for the last 2 years.
Wow.
Imagine what his summers are like as well. So they found out about this, and immediately they pulled together a couple of businesses to help donate some money and labor to be able to install a brand new HVAC system. We were there to capture that whole giving moment between Soldier's Wish and that veteran. And when we're making the content from it and telling people about it, I'm like, listen, I don't care about all the other cute stuff. I need that. That's the focus. That's going to give me the emotional impact where I go, wow, I have to be involved in Soldier's Wish. I need to be a donor. I need to be a sponsor. I have to be a part of this. And I actually was just talking with the client about this as well. For the last 6 months, a lot of the social media content that they've been having us make has been happy birthday to the Navy, hug a veteran. Here's a parade that we're a part of. Like, and I keep telling them, and this is something that we just talked about. And I was like, we need to be telling more stories. We need to be posting content and creating videos that allows these veterans themselves to talk. I don't want Soldier's Wish to say, here's everything that we can do. Look at us, right? It's not about you. Again, okay, when we're talking about that, this industry has a hero, right? And these are heroes. So we need to interview some of them. We need to make sure you've got some photos and tell their stories in a form of content that allows people to make that emotional connection and that tie. And I don't know about you, but my sister is 16 and she's in the military now. So she's actually going through some training stuff and she's finishing up high school. And then my grandfather was in the Vietnam War. So I've got some emotional connection to why I want to be involved in Soldier's Wish, whether that's donation, whether that's labor, whether that's however, right? And so over the last 6 months, like I said, we just are now being able to have this conversation to where I'm like, you have 30 to 40 veteran stories that you've granted wishes to. We need to repurpose this content and to tell those stories at scale. And it's less about Soldier's Wish.
You know, Lou Holtz said it. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's the secret. That's been the hallmark of advertising. Call it marketing, call it whatever you want, business development. That's the hallmark of it. It starts with a relationship. It starts with a handshake. It starts with eye contact. But each client has a journey that they need you to help them go on.
So with one of our questions was, how do you capture the attention of your audience? Is that a pretty good example?
Yeah, absolutely. Since you raised the issue of your grandfather, and I'm probably about the same vintage, we've done some work recently with an agency that helps people figure out the craziness that is Medicare, because the old saying that a camel is a horse that was designed by a committee. Medicare was designed by multiple committees, and so it's definitely not the horse they thought it was. And if you start talking about, okay, well, I'm going to market to senior citizens. You haven't been there, but maybe you were there, when your parents or somebody, you turn 65 and you can get a hernia from dragging all the mail that you get from your mailbox back to the house. And it's all very pretty and it's all got loads of messaging on it and it's totally confusing. We started going down the story brand path and talking about the Medicare beneficiary as the main character in this story. And when we got to the very end, what was clear was that what those folks are afraid of is making a mistake. It's confusing. I don't want to make a mistake. I need somebody that I can trust to help me figure out what the best plan is for me. And then I need them to be there next year to do a review in case things have changed. So in one case, in one agency, the headline on their website is getting Medicare right. And that's what they want to do. If you can communicate that with as few words as possible, hence the say less, sell more, you've got a winner. If you have to start explaining stuff, people's eyes glaze. I call those MeGo conversations. It stands for my eyes glazed over. I'm working with a client now who sends out a whole video with spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff. And I'm picturing the people that he's sending it to saying, yeah, I'm grateful this fellow is thorough, but good Lord, just tell me the answer. And so, I think that's how you capture their attention is you have to understand what their need is. If you don't understand that, you can't capture their attention because you're not telling their story. You're telling somebody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any tips on how to, where do I get started on building that messaging or that story? Like there's one example that I was thinking about was this insurance company that we're working with is in the health insurance space. And their tagline is, we make insurance suck less, because nobody understands health insurance. Unless you're actually working in the space or you're in HR, nobody really understands all those little fine details, right? So it sucks. And so they've got a little turn on their tagline where it's like, we make insurance suck less. And again, it kind of approaches the pain point, tells you exactly what they do and how they do it.
Yeah, but I'm the client. I don't want it to suck at all. I want you to take all the suck away.
So is there something that you would change in that?
Yeah, first of all, we try not to go negative. We try to say, okay, here's what you get. Making it suck less. I mean, all right, if it sucks 100% without you, does it suck 70% with you? 60, 10, 42? I mean, I think it's cute, but I don't think that it says we know how to solve your problem. So, if you wanted to stay in the suck vein, insurance sucks. Take away the suck.
So I'm going to go back to, I still need help with this. I need help with the CMO. I need someone in this place, in that position that can help me out. What happens if I never hire that role? And I just keep hiring the people that execute social, execute video, execute ads, and I spend all this money in those avenues.
You'll be poorer. It's not any more complicated than that. People spend and waste so much money on advertising and marketing and whatnot, and they might as well, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, drop it in the toilet and watch it go clockwise around the wheel before it goes down the drain. You have to start with message. You have to start with message. If you don't start with message, you can't get to step 2. And, I have had folks call and say, well, we've got this and we've got that and blah, blah. Well, okay, if you're in great shape, why are you calling me, first of all? But second of all, show me your stuff. I mean, every client engagement starts with an audit of what they're doing, what they've got, and how it's working. And it's never, this is working great for me. I mean, we're doing more and more of it. And the more we do, the better we're solving our problem. It's always, I don't know what we're doing wrong, but it's not working.
Do you ever have a client that doesn't know what is and what isn't working?
Oh, sure. Is
that common?
It is, especially when they haven't really engaged. When those clients I mentioned earlier, when their sales are good and then they plateau and they don't understand why. They don't know why that's happened. That's frequently a place where they don't really understand what the issue is, but they know something's happened because it was good and now it's not. Sometimes it's just they find themselves with a new competitor in town who's eating their lunch. And what they've done all along just won't work. What got you here won't get you there.
Do you feel like a good CMO is also good in business?
Yeah, I think you have to be. I think you have to have some business savvy.
Like there's other roles in organizations to where I don't feel like you have to be as business savvy, but in a marketing role, I feel like you have to be pretty business savvy. Of course, like accounting, right? Somewhat business savvy, but it's numbers. They're cut and dry. They're ones and zeros. Like there's not a whole lot of worry about relationships, but things like that, like messaging, there's no messaging in accounting, right? In HR, it's a little eternal. It's more internal, and there's just not as much that goes into some of these other departments as I feel like that does sales and marketing. It's like the fuel to the fire, right? It's the fuel to the engine. Without marketing and sales, you have no business, right? You could still run dry on some of these other departments, but I feel like the majority of the business and the CEOs, the presidents, the executives, the owners, they have to be heavily involved in the marketing and the sales process and people.
I would agree to that. And I think the best CMOs need to be able to, at some points, be on the ground and at other points be at drone level. You have to be able to see the organization.
You have to be able to go up and down.
Right. Because there's stuff that's granular and there's stuff that's strategic. So the best chief marketing officers are almost always equal parts tactical and strategic.
Yeah. Okay. I can agree on that.
That's unusual. Most people can't do that. Most people have like one side of the brain or the other.
Okay. And they'll go, oh my God, I'm glad you said that. I feel, okay. So once you find that person, you found a unicorn. And that is why that person is worth, just like you said, that 6-figure salary, right? And if they're not, then they're not worth a penny, right? So if you want to find somebody that's analytical, strategic, creative, and personable, I feel like some of those characteristics, if let me know if there's any others, but that's almost unicorn because you're two different sides of the brain, and usually people are one or the other.
Right. That's why there are loads of people who go into marketing, and there's a handful of people who go into marketing successfully. And I think if you're working with a business, you have an obligation to understand at a 10,000 foot level their commerce, their place in the industry flow, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're up against, et cetera. Thankfully, we have Google and LinkedIn and all those online tools. And, it's not as heavy a lift as it used to be to kind of understand where a client who's coming to you is positioned in the marketplace. But you have to do that. And it's interesting, as my practice goes along, I find the long-term relationships aren't really with my helping them to create anything. It's more strategic. So I've got a number of clients where we have a weekly strategy call, and we just bounce kind of ideas around and whatnot, because this, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the mayonnaise jar, right? It's like the plumber whose sink is clogged up, or the shoemaker whose kids don't have holes in their shoes or don't have shoes.
Which is why somebody would ask, why do I need a coach? Right. Why do I need to hire a consultant? Right. And it's like, you can't see what you're doing wrong. Like, it's almost kind of like trying to proofread your own work. And me and my team were talking about that. This is like where you need that other person to proofread where you misspelled or where grammar needs to be updated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to go the whole, it takes a village route, but I mean, it does. You need to have multiple vantage points, but you still need to have somebody who's leading the parade. There's a reason they put the trombones in the front of the line. It's so they don't goose anybody else. Well, that's where the chief marketing officers are. They're in the front of the line, but then they also run around and get in the back of the line. And then they're the drum major. So they wear lots of different hats depending on what the situation is. Oftentimes, we'll work with the C-suite with a client, even in a mid-sized client. And then the question is, but my team's got to understand this. So we work with the teams. That's way more granular and shoe leather level than the highfalutin rarefied air in the C-suite. But they're both parts of the same thing. And you've got to be able to capture that across the organization. To your question, if you're not good at business, if you don't have a good business head on your shoulders, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's fair. Wow, I've got so many questions. Okay, so I want to give me a story time. Has anything happened in the last 90 days to 6 months that is story worthy? Something to where you're like, this has crashed and burned, or something that has been like, oh my God, touchdown.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, and it's an interesting question, and I think it's not a parochial marketing answer, although it is, and I'll try to explain. I was at a conference in Coral Gables, and it was an insurance related, medical insurance, health insurance related group of people who espouse a deep hatred for the big organizations. We call them BUCAs in the business: Blue Cross, United, Humana. Well, Humana's dropping out now, but those guys. And they want to build a better mousetrap. And as I was going to the sessions, and I was there because my podcast won an award. So they said, you should come down and get your tuxedo pressed. And I went, oh, okay. 4 days in Coral Gables, your nickel, I'm there, man.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I'm going to eat my weight in Ropa Vieja and Cuban coffee. I'm good, man. And so I went to a lot of the sessions because they were really, really good. Sometimes meetings, you get a session that's good.
Yeah.
A session where you go, I should have just stayed by the pool. These were really good. And as I watched the sessions, there was this dichotomy that was happening. On one hand, they were saying, yeah, patients, members, employees, if you will, of organizations really like having that one card with the one logo on it. And when they go to the doctor, they drop that card, and that's the end of it. On the other hand, in the other sessions, they're all talking about how we're building this new thing and it's got all these parts and it's really much better and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're going to all kinds of depth. And I finally said to a couple of the conference organizers, I said, it seems to me that the challenge for your group is building building a Chinese wall, if you will, between the user and all this stuff you guys are building, so that to them, this whole thing, while it may be better, looks frictionless. And it was kind of an epiphany in a way to say, it reinforced and it also expanded my view of the fact that it's not about the machinery that clients make. It's about the problem that they solve and what it looks like on the user end, because it's 2023. The entire universe is ruled by user experience. It doesn't matter what it is. If the user experience is terrible, folks aren't going to use it.
I was told to work on the way that we provide what it looks like to drive the car. So like a test drive without actually driving anything. So like, show me what it's like to drive the car, right? Or to be in the car, and relatable to what our services are for our clients. And it's gotten me to be more, it's forced me to be more creative in how that's portrayed in the sales process, from initial conversation to close. Right.
And why is that? It's because what your clients are saying to you or your prospects are saying to you is build a simulator.
Right.
Well,
and then show me some visuals. I need to be able to see what the next steps are.
Yeah.
What is after I do this? Okay, cool. What's next? Okay. After I do this. Okay. What's next? And so there's a whole process that I'm really working on trying to get granular while creating some visuals. And so before I actually execute any of this, or propose it or client face it, I want to make sure that the back end structure is there to support it as well.
Yes, but the back end structure has to be completely transparent to the client. But I'm smiling because what are they asking you to do? You have children. Mm-hmm. Tell me a story. That's all they're asking.
They're asking you to tell a story. Right. And so, tell me the story. And again, you're not the hero.
Right. And I can conjure up in my mind what the dragon breathing fire and smoke looks like. I don't need that, but I want the story. I want to say, okay, I'm the hero in my story. I'm the main character and I've got these problems and I meet this sidekick who helps me and gives me a plan and says, hey, if I do things 1, 2, 3, and 4, by gosh, my problem will be solved and I will be living in a great place. And if I don't work with you guys, guess what? I'm going to be back where I started, digging the hole deeper. It's a story. Everything that communicates. We were making paintings on cave walls in Chauvert, France, 38,000 years ago. I mean, the joke is that years ago there were hieroglyphics, little symbols that were, banged into cave walls. And today we have emojis. Have we changed? No, we still want stories.
Yeah, no, over the last 6 months, I've been working on improving how I tell stories. Yeah, whether that's
most powerful person in any
social media
organization.
or portfolio stuff like on our website or things like that. And some of that I need to go back through and continue to revise with my team and figure out some ways to position our clients as the heroes, as opposed to being like, look at what we did. No one cares what we did, just like what you said. Nobody cares.
Right. You wouldn't be in the room if they didn't think you could solve their problem.
Right.
So use that. It's almost like doing an assumed close, except it's assumed I'm the guy. But it's, Steve Jobs said the storyteller is the most important person in a company.
Could that be its own role, or is that a CMO?
No, that's a CMO.
There you go.
Yeah, that's a CMO. And, Tom Acker, in his great book, which the title escapes me right now, said stories are order of magnitude more powerful than any set of facts. And yet we dwell on the facts. It's not about the facts. It's not that the story can be false. It's got to be authentic. But we've got to tell the story. That's the same thing that your clients are asking you about when they're saying, build me a simulator. Show me what it's going to look like. Show me what working with you guys is all about. It's just tell me a story, Daddy.
Do you have any favorite stories?
Yeah, Fox and Socks.
Tell me about it.
Fox and Socks is a Dr. Seuss book. I use it to warm up before I do any voiceover work or I do any meetings. It's just a bunch of tongue twisters. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That's actually a good idea. I should actually download something like that, or just implement the process before doing things like this as well. That'd be nice.
I'll give you my favorite story. Actually, if you really pushed me, is The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling, because in there's a story about how this baby elephant gets his long nose, and it's because he has insatiable curiosity. I think as you go through life, the best thing you can have is insatiable curiosity. Just, why is that working that way? How does that work? How are those people doing this? Why is that happening? Ask those questions, because that's what good marketers do. They ask questions.
I encourage all of my clients, every conversation that I've had for the last 6 months, again, this last 6 months for me in my business has been pretty big game changers and process and conversations and telling those stories and such. But, shoot, I lost my train of thought. You had just said something. What was it?
I'm not responsible for remembering those things I say. That's why
Oh my God. Yeah, you are. Yeah. We'll have a rewind button.
It'll come back to you. It'll come back to you.
Anyways. But being able to tell those stories and those processes, man, that was such a good train that I was on. I'll come back around to it. I love telling stories, and that's what one of the big things I'm working on now. But so CMO is a really important position. And do you ever feel like the people don't value that position the way that they should? People or executives or whoever would hire that position?
Yeah, I think there's oftentimes the case where an in-house full-time employee CMO, they lose their sparkle over a little while, or they appear to everybody else to lose their sparkle because it's just the stuff. If you do your job well as a full-time CMO, it's one of these, of course. How else would you do it? And people start to not take it for granted so much, but it just becomes table stakes. And that happens sometimes, but it's all relationships. It depends on how you set yourself up in the organization and what position you see yourself in. If you're just an implementer of somebody else's strategy, then, yeah. But if for all of those little baby CMOs out there who are growing themselves into full-time jobs, make sure you're part of the team. Make sure you're part of the leadership team. Understand that you have an important role to fill on that team. As important as HR or onboarding or hiring or any of those other disciplines or accounting.
It's just as important as all the other roles. Absolutely. And especially as we mentioned, as I was talking about earlier, how it's the driver for the engine. It's the gas for the engine. It's without the proper sales and marketing people, you're still responsible, especially for a lot of these real small businesses, right? And I believe that there's still, as far as I know, that there's still nobody, and I'm still scouting, but there's nobody in this one client that I'm working with in the organization. I do believe that the owner still is heavily involved in the marketing, and they don't really have like a salesperson because they're a restaurant, but I believe that he is the CMO position. And at some point, sooner or later, he's going to have to make that adjustment to where he relies on somebody else and hands off that responsibility to be able to help drive these different engines, because he's got several brands. And so I just wonder how you're going to be able to, how somebody like that makes that transition, right? Like, how do you find that right person to take over? Because he's so heavily involved and he does a great job, right? but he need like I have, as far as I know, there's no one else in that role. So how does he take over? How does he hand off that responsibility?
Well,
what does that transition look like?
In my experience, finding the person to whom you hand it off is not nearly as challenging as getting somebody who's built something to hand it off. If you look at studies across, and they teach this in pretty much every legitimate business school, companies will get to a certain size. Usually it's around 10, 12, $13 million top line. And they have a decision to make. We want to be a kick-ass $13 million company. And that's awesome because you know how many companies don't make it at all, much less to 10 or 12 or 13 million. Or they have to decide we want to be a 25 or a $30 million company. And 85% of those fail. And the reason they fail is explained really well in a book by a guy named Joel Arthur Barker. It's called Future Edge. And Joel talks about paradigm shifts. And he likens a paradigm to an S-curve, an upward S-curve. And at the very bottom, when that S-curve is just starting to go up, there are new folks called paradigm pioneers in his book. They're the ones who bring the new ideas. They look at what's there and go, you know what, I got a better way to do that. And then their way becomes the transcendent way to do it. And that's when that S-curve just goes straight up until it doesn't. And it starts to wane and it hooks down a little bit. And almost always the people who bring the next new ideas are paradigm pioneers. It's very, very difficult for somebody who's invested in a business and built it from the ground up to allow themselves to take a different seat at the table and hand off those relationships. You're talking about human behavior, and you can read Chip and Dan Heath and some of the other folks in modern literature about that. Human behavior is the hardest thing to change. And for a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs, they can't picture themselves not staying in that role. So finding somebody to whom you can hand it is easy compared to being mature enough and emotionally stable enough to say, in order for my baby to grow, I have to let it go to college and leave the house.
Yeah. Being able to let go of that and trust that someone knows what they're doing as well, too. Yeah, because if not, I mean, there goes that average two-year position.
Well, it's worse. You basically smother your business, and then you start getting bitter and annoyed because you can't make that leap. And you know darn well you've got a good product and you're well positioned in the marketplace. But it's like Pogo said on that first Earth Day poster, we have met the enemy and they is us. So that's really the challenge for the business owner, in this case, your restaurant owner, to say, in order to grow, I've got to take a step back or sit at a different chair at the table.
Or bring in a new chair.
Yep, absolutely.
I feel like where I'm at, between you and me, I feel like where I'm at, right? Yeah, between you and me, I feel like I'm really good at the execution part. I can get it done, understand the process and the people and the team and the skills and the systems and all that stuff that it takes to be able to execute something. But when it comes to the strategy side, I understand it. I get it. I probably couldn't build out, the whole messaging and the storylines and the strategy part and the plans and all that kind of stuff. I bet you if I spent the weekend working on a project like that, I bet you I could knock it out. I bet you I could. And I bet you I would do a decent job. And you would be a great teacher to judge it on and grade it on. But that's like, again, that's not always a skill set that can be immediately acquired either. It's not like you can just bring in someone in that role to that seat at the table and then just be like, okay, here, study this and then go. Because they may bring you something with no experience and also not having that talent on the other side of that, those brain waves to be able to bring that talent in to be able to build it. There's some, and also I feel like that role has to be somewhat visionary too. They have to be able to foresee and then see from, just like you said, like that 30,000 foot view all the way to that 5,000 foot view. I guess that's kind of like my short recap as well too on some of the takeaways that I've got from this as well. Don't undermine the CMO, their position, their value. And we'll probably have to talk about some more of this stuff too, but making sure you try to vet them the best. Or however that should be done. I wouldn't know where to start with that.
It's about relationship and culture. Back a zillion years ago, I had a client when I was first getting into the insurance business who sold really crummy furniture in a really crappy part of town. And one day I said to him, Jimmy, who buys this stuff? And he said, Davey, there's an ass for every seat. You got to find the right person for the right fit for the right position. And it starts with chemistry. It's almost like dating.
Oh, that's so funny because I'm hiring right now. I've been interviewing people for the last couple of weeks, and I'm trying to hire for a content creator position. I was telling my team, I was like, I want to fangirl over somebody. Mm-hmm. I want to see their resume, have a conversation with them, and be like, this is it. It's the hit. It's the first date. This is happening. I love it. We're gonna keep them on now.
Wait. I want to make sure that I understand what you just said. You want to react emotionally to somebody who can help you solve a problem.
That's what it sounds like.
Gee whiz.
Oh, shocker.
What a concept. Who knew?
And again, it comes back to the culture part. When you just said that, I would rather have somebody with lacking skill sets, but they've got the passion and they fit right in the culture. I can help you with the skill sets. I can work on that, and I can provide you with tools, teams, and resources to fit that gap. But if you're bad for the culture, I don't care if you've got the greatest skill sets in the world. You got to go because you're going to kill the rest of us. Absolutely.
It's like a cancer. And that's, if you own a business, that's your primary role, is to build the culture. Business, to misquote Peter Drucker, business is downstream from culture.
Yeah. And that could be another reason why a company crashes and burns. Because of culture.
Absolutely.
Oh, man. I'm actually, my fiance's company right now is like that. Their culture is pretty, it could be. Well, no, it's not her. It's somebody else. They're pretty, man, who was it? There was someone I was talking to, and they're like, oh, man, my culture is terrible. Like, the only reason why I'm here is for a paycheck. Outside of that, I'm out.
That's death. Yeah. That's death. That's a company that's got terminal cancer.
And nothing will change until it makes a bottom line impact. And hopefully at that point it catches C-level's eyes, and somebody up there goes, we have a problem. Is it sales? Well, okay, well, something's wrong. It's not sales. It's working. It's not, is it HR? Okay. What's wrong with our people? Let's have some conversations with our managers and supervisors. Then hopefully they have those conversations and they go, okay, well, it's an HR problem. It's with people. It's the way that our culture is. And I hear a lot of people hate corporate culture.
Well, there's a reason for that. But, back, 20 something years ago, I was running a company. I was president of a company that had 300 employees and operations in a couple of different states. And when they hired me as president, they asked me what I wanted in my office. And I said, a mirror. I said, I don't care about the desk and all that other stuff, but it's got to have a mirror. And
why is that?
Well, why does it have to have a mirror? And I said, because every time we make a mistake, every time we have to let somebody go, every time we lose a client, I want to stand in front of that mirror and say, how did I contribute to this problem, or how did I help it? And C-level people don't often do that. And that's in your example of having them, try to go, okay, well, something's wrong. It's the culture, but it's not us. Well, always, what's that old Chinese expression? A fish rots from the head down. It's almost always the people at the top of the pyramid. There's a great story in a book by Mike Abrashoff called Best Damn Ship in the Navy. And I won't belabor the whole story, but he's an admiral and he's asking all the sailors to come into his quarters, take off all the rank and whatnot, and just tell them what's wrong with the ship. And the last person who comes in says, sir, the way I see it, the Navy is like a big tree full of monkeys. When you look up, all you see is a bunch of monkeys smiling at you. When we look down, our view is a little bit different. And it's almost always the top. So get a mirror. If you're in a company and you don't like the culture and you're an owner or a goga-moga at that company, get a mirror.
This comes back on you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that a lot of those roles have too much ego for them to be able to have the humility to look at themselves and be like, is it something that I am doing? Well, of course not. That's not. I'm the president of the company. It couldn't be me. It's somebody else.
And 90% of the time, it's you.
Yeah. What is it? Shit rolls downhill.
Yep. Yeah. But that's a different discussion for another time.
Yeah. Okay. David, it has been such a pleasure to spend the last hour talking about all these stories and the positions for CMO and marketing and messaging. Is there anything that really stood out to you in the last hour that we talked about that we took away anything, what would that be?
I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, I think it's the comment you made about your client saying, show me how this is going to work. Because I really do believe that what they're asking you is, Braedon, tell me a story. The whole world runs on stories. It always has. It always will. The medium in which you tell the story doesn't matter. How repetitive you are with telling the story may matter a little bit, but really doesn't matter. What matters is the story and understanding your role in it. If you can do that, there's nothing you can't conquer. If you can't do that, you're going to be swimming upstream for a long, long time.
Very well said, man. This is great. I really appreciate you coming on, man. Yeah, this has been awesome. You guys, if you have any questions, how can someone get a hold of you if they have questions, or do you want them?
They can go to my website, which is the Saltzman Group, SALTZMAN.com. They can go grab a downloadable that we've got specifically for folks when I appear on a podcast, which is the saltzmangroup.com/download. And there's buttons all over the place for how to get in touch and to set up a discovery call or just a conversation. I love chatting with people. I've never had a conversation where one of two things doesn't happen. I either win or I learn something.
And hopefully you won and learned something today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure chatting with you. I appreciate the invite.
And in the show notes, you guys will be able to access those. I'll make sure that there's a link in there. So if you're wondering how do you get a hold of David, or how do you contact, or how do you learn more, that'll all be in the show notes. So I appreciate all you guys for listening. And David, thank you again. And we'll see you guys next time.